It's great to see you all in the room, and welcome to everybody who's joining us online as well for this very important occasion. We're delighted on Social Mobility Day to be hosting, well, thanks to HSBC, it's really hosting us, but anyway, a social mobility event on levelling the playing field. It's obviously a really critical issue for the Diversity Project. David is going to share some data and a set of targets that we've set around social mobility. But we know that this is an area where many firms want to do more. Many of our members want to do more, but aren't there yet. They're not quite sure even how to measure social mobility. It's an area where people are further behind than, say, on gender or ethnicity. We want to do it because of fairness. Very important that obviously we level the playing field, as is the theme for today. But it's also really important for the cognitive diversity of our industry and our firms. And that's another area that the Diversity Project is starting to work on, sort of restating the case for different types of thinking in the room. And I'm pretty confident that we're going to discover, although I don't want to front run, obviously, what will be a rigorous academic study, that actually people from different socioeconomic backgrounds will bring quite a lot of differences to the table when it comes to decision making, to working in teams. I think most of us would agree that it doesn't really matter your gender or your ethnicity, if you've all had the same educational background, the same social background, you're going to have much less variety of thinking and experience. So very important for the performance of our firms. It's also very important, I think, for the city as a whole. It's absolutely vital that the City of London is not seen as an exclusive environment. I was talking just before we sat down to our colleague Vincent Keaveney from Progress Together, who's going to be on our first panel. Delighted to be collaborating today and in the future around the speaker series that we'll be announcing today. But obviously, again, we were talking about citywide, that this is an absolutely critical issue to collaborate on and come up with solutions together. I have to say it's also important for me personally. Now, I don't come from an underprivileged background, but I come from a modest background. My parents are both teachers. I went to local state schools. My state school when I was in primary years was pretty terrible, if I'm honest. There were 42 children in each class. This was in the days when it wasn't seen as relevant how big the class size was. And I would come home every day and cry. It was just like a miserable experience. I basically was self-taught from like 7 till 11. Luckily, my parents were teachers, so they could help me out. But it really, really was a big drawback for me, particularly socially, particularly around confidence. I then went on to another comprehensive school for my secondary education. And I was nerdy, geeky, whatever. I was academic. Let's put it as polite way. I'll put it academic. And everyone said, oh, she should apply to Oxbridge. But I looked at the 4th and the 7th term papers, as was then the entrance test, and I thought, I can't do that. And I have no idea of how, no one would be able to tutor me. I wouldn't know where to start. And I ended up being, so I started research, couldn't obviously go online then, but I ended up being an early beneficiary of an early access scheme that one of the colleges was doing at Cambridge, when I basically had to do an interview and get 2 E's A-level. I want to emphasize I got slightly better than the 2 E's. But it was a good lesson to me that there are, if you're like me and quite determined, you can open the door, but a lot of people can't do that. And we're going to hear some amazing stories later today, which I'm sure will encourage everybody to think they must do more. We're preaching to the converted, probably in the room and online, but we at the Diversity Project are determined to do more. And thank you again for your support and for being here today. And thank you, HSBC. You are amazing friends of the Diversity Project, so thank you again. Right, I'm now going to hand over to one of the 3 co-leads of the Social Mobility Workstream at Diversity Project, David Aujla, who's going to introduce and give us some more data around why we are all here today. Thank you, David.
I'd like to pretend that clap was for me, so I'll be doing that. It's not every day in a case of social mobility that you get to follow a baroness at the lectern, but nor do many baronesses come from a state school background. So that's a great example of social mobility to think about on Social Mobility Day. As Helena said, I am one of the co-leads of our social mobility workstream. Why did we put that together? Well, we put it together because really we thought a lot of the other characteristics had been thought about for quite some time. Some progress had been made, but actually there was something that was being overlooked, and that is actually socioeconomic background. So we set up that work stream about 3 years ago, and quite frankly, we were fortunate to do so at a time when other organisations such as Progress Together and the Social Mobility Foundation were also starting some really important work. So the good news is that social mobility has come from pretty much nowhere to somewhere reasonable in the sort of consciousness of people who are minded to think about diversity and inclusion. But we also need to talk to those people who aren't naturally minded to take it into account. And that's why we're here today, really. You can see, hopefully, on the screens the agenda that we have for you. I'm going to keep my bit as short as I can because we've got such fabulous panelists that have agreed to speak today. Well, two panels, in fact, where stories are going to be shared that I think we can all learn from. Before I do that, though, I'm going to talk about why social mobility is important and speak about our toolkit that we have. So one thing we did as a workstream was kind of come up with a few key things that we thought that member firms of the Diversity Project, and let's remember, there's over 100 of those, so we can really make a difference here. What are the key things they could do to actually move the dial? So we thought of three things. One is around data, and my colleague James always says that, well, he's borrowed the quote, but I'll attribute it to him, it's sunlight's the best disinfectant, and it goes in line with that kind of management speak of what gets measured gets managed. So it's really important that we collect the data. But let's not wait for the data, and I think that's a theme you might hear later on. It's important also to partner with organisations that are maybe doing it better than us at the moment. So one of the challenges that we've set to member firms is how can we get involved in programmes that focus on socioeconomic diversity to really start moving the dial? And lastly, what does our talent pipeline look like? Are we actually accessing the broad spectrum of people from around the country? Now, we know as an industry we're pretty London-centric. We're not really tapping into the regions, but we're also quite skewed to the more privileged folks. So if you think about 7% of the population being privately educated and think about your firms and the senior leaders and those in the influential roles, I guess we might not have the exact number, but I guess I'd like to think most of us probably don't believe it's a less than double-digit number of people in those roles. Let's think about the data, though, because as I said, that is the kind of thing that helps us to know the extent of the problem. And when we looked at our goals and progress tool across a number of diversity characteristics and who was collecting the data on them, this is what we saw. So I'm using three here. There are dozens that we're collecting, but I'm taking gender, race and ethnicity, and of course, social mobility, because I think it's a good comparison with things that have been in the consciousness for a bit longer. As you would hope, almost everyone is collecting data on gender. I wish that number was 100%, of course, so whoever the others are, that's a nice reminder for you to start doing so. Race and ethnicity, the vast majority of member firms are collecting that data. Again, a reminder to you to really start collecting that and get that number up to 100%. But when you get to social mobility, and admittedly, as I said, it hasn't really been in the consciousness of member firms for that long, we are some way behind. That's a very different pie chart that we're looking at, and I guess we all have a pie chart in this industry, don't we? But we would like to sit here or stand here in a year or two's time and see meaningful change in that number. I mentioned the toolkit, Helena mentioned the toolkit. What we wanted to do was give member firms something that they can use to take practical action today without necessarily waiting for those stats to come in. And you can see here some of the screenshots from a fabulous toolkit that's been put together by our workstream. And I will call out one of our particular members, which is Rachel Allen, who will hate me for calling her out, but she has been the driving force behind that toolkit. And it's absolutely amazing. There are some great case studies in there from member firms that have done well in particular areas, whether it's partnering with another organization like Upreach or Investment 2020, whether it's setting up degree apprenticeships like HSBC or BlackRock, or setting up employee resource groups where you could really start evangelizing internally and start getting senior management involved and starting to move the dial. What we will be doing is sending all people listening in and watching today a copy of that toolkit, and we'd encourage you to share it widely with your own firms.